Hi guys, in this video we're going to be talking about a work visa or startup visa. Which is best, or can you do both? So the trajectory, if you're on a startup visa, is switch to the innovator visa after 2 years. But during that time on the startup visa, you can actually work part-time for the minority of the time on other work. Now, most people who end up getting sponsored in the UK do so because they've had some initial interface with their prospective employer. I have tier 4 students who've gone on to get work visas. You can switch within the UK without having to advertise. That's with an unrestricted certificate of sponsorship. And the way that often works is they start doing an internship or some free work, volunteer work perhaps, but most typically an internship with a prospective employer. And they become so invaluable in their work with the employer that the employer decides to take that extra step to get a sponsor license to then sponsor them, or they already have a sponsor license and they go to issue an unrestricted certificate of sponsorship. But whether they have a sponsor license or not, it's a significant undertaking administratively for an employer to take someone on a tier 2 sponsorship, especially if they're not a very large employer. There might be a medium-sized one with a more modest HR function. So the interesting thing about the startup visa for many people, and let me just zoom in on this. This is a live stream, so thank you for bearing with me. Is through this initial period, of course, you only have to be in the UK for 185 days, but through this initial period on the startup visa, before transitioning to an innovator visa, if that's what you want to do, you can work for the minority of the time on other work. So you can have your startup running, you've got to spend the majority of the time on that, but the minority of the time you can spend on other work. Now that means that you have the right to work in any other work in the UK. Therefore, if you wanted to do an internship, it could be a paid internship or unpaid internship. Or if you're in a position to challenging for some, then you can do so. And that can give you a pathway to then transitioning into a tier 2 general visa. Now, of course, if you're on the startup visa, after 2 years, you can go on to the innovator visa. But there's nothing to stop you, having got a startup visa, from doing that work for the minority of the time, part-time, and then switching onto a sponsored basis. So that's the key point I wanted to highlight. I don't think this has necessarily been seen as the opportunity which I think it is, but the point of the startup visa is to give someone an opportunity to bring new ideas into the UK and to have their startup here and to see if it works. If it doesn't, though, some startups do fail. In fact, the criterion for under the visa route is simply that you make reasonable progress, so you don't need to come into revenue. But if you personally make the decision that you don't want to pursue the business just working on the business, you don't want to go onto don't want to become a full-time entrepreneur having tested it for a year, let's say, or the 2-year maximum under the startup visa, then you might be in a position to then go on to a sponsored role and to make an application under tier 2. And I think this is one of the ways that you can overcome this gap. How can you get a sponsored job role if you don't have the opportunity to have an interface with your prospective employers? So one way of dealing with that is tier 4. So you have a limited right to work on tier 4 visa in most of the subcategories of tier 4, for example, during term time. And that can give you an opportunity to get the foot in the door with a prospective employer. But the startup visa can operate in the same way, insofar as you can spend the minority of the time. Let's say, for example, you're working 5 days a week and then you can spend 2 of those days in other work, and having carried out that work, you've got your foot in the door with the employer, and then after 1 year or 2 years, they might want to engage you then on a full-time basis, and might then, having worked with you and through your role having become invaluable to the company, they may then be prepared to take that step to sponsor you under a Tier 2 general visa. That puts you onto a 5-year pathway to indefinite leave to remain. So if we go back to this diagram, for the startup and innovator visa, you are on a 5-year pathway to indefinite leave to remain. But if you switch from the startup visa at year 2, then you've got 3 years to get to permanent resident, in other words, indefinite leave to remain, and you can apply for citizenship at year 6. But on the Tier 2 route, you would switch after the startup visa, the end of year 2, onto that trajectory, and then that would give you a 5-year pathway to indefinite leave to remain. So you'd need to do 5 years under Tier 2. I think it's not an option for everyone, because most people coming onto the startup visa want to have every intention of following through with their idea after 2 years, but that it's not necessarily the case that you have to. And I hope that this video is useful in showing a different route by which you might want to achieve your overall goal of settling in the UK and making a valuable contribution to the UK. I hope that's helpful. This is a live stream, and when I'm doing these live streams, you're free to ask any questions. I can't see any questions for now. I'll be doing this a live stream tomorrow, though, at the same time. So if you do have any questions you want to ask me on these live streams, I'll be very happy to help. Thanks very much, and see you in the next video.